They don't even dey wait for us for you.
For your panel. The day efficient. What do we get now?
Yeah, at least we should be there. Let me see my face. They've started, so why I can't? Why I not see my face?
Not because I suffer fast, not because I pray and fast. No be your show, no be that. I'm watching. Daily, Osinachi. I'm no qua, Osinachi. One man, Osinachi. I'm watching. Daily, Osinachi. Mama, Osinachi.
nọ́mbà wa, àwọn ọmọdé wọ̀nyí kéré sí nọ́mbà wa.
Àní wọ́n kéré o, wọ́n kéré o, wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa. Wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa, àwọn ọmọdé wọ̀nyí kéré sí nọ́mbà wa.
Wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa, wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa.
Not because I suffer fast, not because I pray and fast. No be your show, no be that. I'm watching. Daily, Osinachi. I'm no qua, Osinachi. One name, Osinachi. I'm watching. Daily, Osinachi. Mama, Osinachi. Àní wọ́n kéré o, wọ́n kéré o, wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa. Wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa, àwọn ọmọdé wọ̀nyí kéré sí nọ́mbà wa.
Wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa, wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa.
Not because I suffer fast, not because I pray and fast. No be your show, no be that. I'm watching. Daily, Osinachi. I'm no qua, Osinachi. One name, Osinachi. I'm watching. Daily, Osinachi. Mama, Osinachi.
kéré o, wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa. Wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa, àwọn ọmọdé wọ̀nyí kéré sí nọ́mbà wa.
Wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa. Wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa.
Not because I suffer fast, not because I pray and fast. No be your show, no be that. I'm watching. Daily, Osinachi. I'm no kwa, Osinachi. One man, Osinachi. I'm watching. Daily, Osinachi. Mama, Osinachi.
Wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa. Wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa, àwọn ọmọdé wọ̀nyí kéré sí nọ́mbà wa.
Wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa. Wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa.
Not because I suffer fast, not because I pray and fast. No be your show, no be that. I'm watching. Daily, Osinachi. I'm no kwa, Osinachi. One man, Osinachi. I'm watching. Daily, Osinachi. Mama, Osinachi.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Hello.
Okay. Okay, I think we should go ahead and get started. It's 3:02 p.m. now. Okay. All right, so good to see everybody. Hopefully some other people will join as we go. But I'm delighted to welcome you to this panel on the politics of motherhood, midwifery, and child health. And I look forward to hearing some of your wonderful papers. We have a wonderful setup lineup here today. And we'll go ahead and get started. We have 4 presenters, so each presenter is going to have 15 minutes to present their paper, and then we'll go into the question and answers. We have 30 minutes for question and answers, so we'll go into that. And if you have questions and you're in the audience, feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question. I'm not sure if this setup, it's a webinar setup, so I'm not sure if it allows you to ask questions live, but if it doesn't, we'll be monitoring the chat and we will pose those questions. So if you have questions, you can either try to unmute yourself and ask, or you can leave it in the chat, and we will make sure that we bring that question up during the Q&A. All right, so our first presenter is Oluwatosin Adeyemi. Oluwatosin is a graduate student from the Department of History, University of Ibadan. Her research interests include maternal and child health, gender and migration, with her master's thesis on print media and motherhood representation in colonial Nigeria. She was a Falling Walls Lab Ibadan 2020 participant and a member of the Lagos Studies Association. And today she's going to present a paper titled "A Mother Like No Other, The Politics of Child Rearing in Colonial Nigeria." All right, over to you, Oluwatosin.
Okay, I think she's not online presently. Can you hear me? Yeah, I think okay, I think probably we should move to the next speaker and hope she joins us as soon as she gets connected.
Okay. Do you want to introduce the next speaker?
Oh, okay, I should go ahead and do that. The next speaker on our list is Esther Oluwashino Ajayilowo. She is an assistant professor of women's studies in the comparative women's studies program at Spearman College. Dr. Ajayi holds a PhD before adjourning in academia. She worked for over a decade on health, gender, human rights, and development issues with non-governmental and governmental organizations, including the US mission in Nigeria. Recent scholarly research focuses on health and reproductive justice for Black women of African descent at the intersection of race, gender, and nationalities. She's going to be presenting work on indigenous midwifery and childbirth, the Agbebis, in quote, navigation of colonial paradigms in post-colonial Africa. So Dr. Esther, over to you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Dr. Olorunnibe. I hope I got your name correctly.
Yes, you did.
Thank you, and I hope everyone can hear me. So my name is Esther Ajayilowo, actually. I think I should start putting the army. But I guess it's often
apologies for the wrong pronunciation.
No need for apologies. Yeah, I just thought, I always get that, and I would start putting the army. All right, so thank you everyone for having me today. I'm going to try to share my screen. Hold on a second, so share screen. Okay. I think I'm able to do that. I hope everyone can see my screen.
Yes, we can see your screen. Yeah.
Thank you for the information. Sometimes one is not sure of things like this. So get better. No, not now. So let's try to do a slideshow starting from the beginning. Yes, more like it. Right. So I tried my video on, but it wasn't looking so good. So I hope you all don't mind that my video is not showing up. Okay. So this is what it looks like. Can someone let me know, is this better or should I just do the photo? It's so dark. I have tried everything possible. Dr. Williams and Dr. Lauren, but would you rather I leave this video on or just go back to the photo?
Whichever is convenient for you, it's fine by us.
It's fine, yeah.
That's
okay.
It doesn't matter.
Thank you. So today I'll be talking about indigenous midwifery and childbirth, and focusing specifically on the Agbebi's navigation of colonial paradigms in this quote unquote post-colonial Africa. And just before I go ahead, I would just like to do a little bit of conceptual clarification, as I know some might wonder, right, why using indigenous midwives as opposed to the globalized maternal health labeled traditional birth attendant. And so some questions that might come up will be like, so what's the difference between traditional birth attendants, which is the popular name that one will find in social science research, oftentimes humanities, and in all the places, and what will be the difference between that and indigenous midwife, especially in the context of Africa? So those questions that usually come up will be, what's in the name, what's the difference between these, and why does actually that name and the label, indigenous midwife matters? So as part of the baggage of the colonial maternal health framework, which came about during the colonial era, where the epistemology and everything Western became what was forced on the continent and all the colonized territory. So part of that baggage is what I see in that label, traditional birth attendants, especially about how it's been construed and used in research and understood, and all the assumptions that go into who a traditional birth attendant is. So what I found interesting in my research is speaking with the Agbebis and really highlighting the ways that they highlight their identity and their positionality. So for them, just this traditional birth attendant seems to hide a lot of things and do not give room for context and content of the several ways that they identify themselves and the sort of maternal care services that they provide for birthing women. And so for them, it's a name that they struggle with. But it's not just straightforward for them to just want to be called Agbebi, or as some would call them, Elewe and all other native names. It's so much complex because sometimes they really need this name, traditional birth attendant, to navigate the maternal health care framework. So for instance, the ones in Lagos State will be called by the Lagos State government, and sometimes by WHO, and sometimes have also been part of that kind of training initiative for traditional birth attendants at the US Embassy, Nigeria. So a lot of ways that people just use these blanket terms, and they would have to identify with that to be able to be part of this training, to be accepted into the framework, and in particular for them to be able to navigate and be recognized, be acknowledged, and also for them to be able to refer the birthing women when there's a need for them to be able to refer to the hospital. So sometimes they use this name even while they understand all of the baggage that come with the name. So one of the ways that they resist is really distinguishing themselves from other birth attendants that might come under the traditional birth attendants, but who do not have indigenous birthing epistemology and experience that the midwives, the indigenous midwives have. So the indigenous midwives that I interviewed are the ones who have inherited this indigenous birthing methods and knowledge from their grandparents. This has been like from generation to generation that is being passed down. So for them, it's not just something that they just like really started or just like learned, like some auxiliary nurses or even some faith-based attendants who might not necessarily have had this knowledge passed down from, you know, their foremothers and forefathers to them. So in that way, they try to distinguish themselves and they navigate using this name when necessary, but then at the same time, one is to distinguish themselves from other ones who do not have the sort of knowledge and skills that they possess. So one way that I think that they resist is really understanding their positionality within this identity and naming in global maternal health framework. Right. So I said earlier, it's really complex. So when I think about resistance and navigation in particular, it consists of, you know, sometimes having to accept some things as part of the post-colonial global maternal health framework. Sometimes it would also entail rejection of some. It would also entail sometimes just outrightly just trying to stand their grounds in the things that they believe around birthing and cultures of birthing, their spiritual birthing knowledge and all the ways that they carry out their services. So the ways that they navigate this is some of them would want to be acknowledged by, and I'm really talking about Lagos State specifically because I have also really researched other states and see what the differences might be. So for instance, in a state like Ondo State, it will be different because you won't even be part of a training. The Agbebiye program is really trying to get the Agbebi, the traditional birth attendants, out of service in its entirety, paying them to really refer every birthing woman to the hospital. So, but in the Lagos context, the Lagos State government is providing training, and some of these indigenous midwives would have to accept this training for them to be acknowledged. Right? And then even in accepting all of that, some of them will reject like very particular things that they learned in the training. So for instance, some of them will think about how for them, birthing position has to be this way, right? And then the sort of temperature of water that you would use for a birthing mother after birth should be this way. They have their own way of taking care of the umbilical cord, which sometimes really conflicts with what they've been told or what they've been trained to do by the quote unquote Western medical experts. So these are the ways that there continues to be friction, even as a state like Lagos State tends to want to like integrate and collaborate with indigenous midwives. So in all of these, I see a high level of resistance from the Agbebi, even as they're, you know, being part of this training and using some of this training. So for instance, some of them will refer for a scan if need be, and some of them will, you know, check blood pressure. They've been taught how to do that. They've been taught to watch out for danger signs and know when there seems to be complications that's beyond what they could take care of and to refer. So they imbibe all of these things. And then they talked about how these, in addition to what they know from the indigenous experience, becomes really useful, right? And then in that way, it could be as a win-win. But on the other end, when there are conflicts, right, it becomes really difficult for them to really stand their ground and use what they want to use. So, but in all of that, they retain their spiritual beliefs, their cultural beliefs about birthing practices, and then they retain their belief in the use of African traditional medicine, right, and birthing methods. Right. And this is one thing that I really also want to talk about. So there's a referral process that they've been told to do. So, oh, you have to watch out for this sign. So if there are these signs that the blood pressure is really high, this way you have to refer. And the places that they are being told to refer to, they would have to deal with the quote unquote skilled birth attendants, which the WHO would really define as only the OBGYNs, the nurses, and the Western medical midwives, right? So the challenge would also become the fact that the birthing mothers that are being referred from the Agbebis, indigenous midwives, are oftentimes rejected at these other Western medical spaces because women are blamed for having, been to indigenous midwives. We don't know what you've been taking. We don't know what else you've been taking. And sometimes it's like, well, we really don't have space. You haven't been registered here. So all of that, despite the fact that the state has provided them referral forms. So we see a promise of, them being able to do certain things and navigate, but at the same time, there are also gatekeepers who are shutting out the women who have been to this traditional birth attendance. So a way that I see that they navigate this, which is so complex, and it's a navigation. And I really just like that term to describe all of this. It's a navigation and it's ongoing and continuous. So some of them will talk about how they would rather refer to private hospitals where they have good relationship with the owners of the private hospitals who understand that, well, these indigenous midwives also possess the skills, right? And they're coming from there. So it's easier for them sometimes to do that. Some of them would have maybe personal relationships with the OBGYN or skill, this quote unquote, and I'm saying always putting that in scare quotes because I'm also questioning what it means to be skilled, right? Who is actually a skilled birth attendants, right? Does it really entail only the Western medical trained personnel, or which we can also see our indigenous midwives possess in-depth indigenous birthing knowledge, which is often really not acknowledged, as they are always been marginalized and assumed to be the reason and the cause for high maternal mortality rates, which in my research I have found not to be true in the context of the Agbebis in Lagos. It's the ones who have inherited indigenous birthing knowledge and are really very careful in the ways that they handle childbirth, right? So there's a challenge with the referral process, right? So they have to make the complex choice of where to refer or not to refer, because for them, sometimes it's a matter of life and death. So would they want to really still take on this person and try their best, even though there are these danger signs? Or would they refer this woman to these medical spaces where they know that they might still be challenged? So sometimes it's like, well, whatever you do, it seems like this person's life might be in danger. So that's one of the things that they face. When to refer, where to refer even. Because some of the hospitals are like, well, we're so booked, we don't have the space, we can't take them in. And how to really facilitate the acceptance of the referred birthing person. Sometimes they would have to go with them and show their letters and really be there for the women. And sometimes they are turned down outrightly. So this is really complex and complicated. But it's really interesting to see that they're not just docile and not doing anything about this. They are really thinking critically about what to do. So for them, it's only really a matter of saving lives, because these are women in their community. And a lot of them see the children that they birth as, part of their children, because we understand that motherhood on the continent of Africa is not only biological. So for them, they are people who work and support women to really bring about life and being in their community. Let me see, how many minutes more do I have? And
you have about 2 more minutes.
About 2 more minutes, thank you. So one way that they also are really, really resisting is really disrupting that strict binary between skilled birth attendants and traditional birth attendants, right? So the binary is, well, the Western medically trained birthing attendants is a skilled person, but for them, they really amazed me about how they talked about what they know and how to do, and that'll be my mind. This is not my presentation today is not about that, so I won't go in depth, but they have in-depth knowledge that we would not even think about. Thinking about instances of how they know how to deliver breech babies and try to work with women so it doesn't lead to cesarean operation, because they've been doing this for years and it's been passed down. And it's interesting to just see the depth of knowledge that they have that no one really even talked about. So they talked a lot about that. They talked about how they deliver care, and they talked about how for them it's a matter of saving lives. And one thing that really stands out to me that I really always want to highlight is they are aware of all the assumptions about, who are traditional birth attendants and all the assumptions of them being the one killing the women and all of that. And they were really strong in highlighting the fact that because they work in the community sort of like holds them accountable. They are mindful of how the community sees and perceives them, how they support the community. So they would say, but on the other end, when you think about the skilled birth attendants, they think about a lot of ways that even whenever there's medical negligence and loss of life, nothing really happens. No one is able to hold anyone accountable. So for them, they were able to really think critically through all of these. And I thought that was really amazing, that I had that opportunity to really highlight some of the things that they are really thinking and believing about the kind of work that they deliver. So overall, I see my research using a decolonial framework, which is not really like a total move away from the Western medical back to just the purely African indigenous birthing epistemology, because now it's the post-colonial era. We cannot take away the fact that there's been that introduction of the Western medical framework and that it has its own purposes and usefulness and benefits if only every other thing can be put in place by the government, make it accessible and all of that. And also the important thing to also acknowledge the significance of the knowledge that indigenous midwives have. So my research that I'm presenting today is just thinking about how in this post-colonial era, there are indigenous midwives who have in-depth indigenous birthing knowledge and are serving the women. The sort of work that they do are calling our attention to really have a rethink, right, of what skilled birth attendance means, and the space of indigenous birthing knowledge in this post-colonial era, and how we might be able to see that as a way to really think about a more holistic, a more open-ended approach, a useful approach to really deliver maternal health care to women, and also being aware that we can reduce maternal mortality, because of course in this research I'm also finding out that lots of maternal deaths actually take place more in the medical spaces, and attention is not given to that because it's easy to just shift the blame and of maternal death to the traditional birth attendants, which are the Agbebis are seen as part of that larger group. So thank you all for listening today. I know there will be time for questions, so thank you for having me. I will be happy to listen to others. So thank you.
All right, thank you, Esther. We'll go to the next presentation, and that is by Oluwatosin Adeyemi. You have 15 minutes for your presentation, and then we can address other things in the Q&A. Oluwatosin Adeyemi is a graduate student from the Department of History at the University of Ibadan, and her research interests include maternal and child health, gender, and migration. Her master's thesis focused on print media and motherhood representation in colonial Nigeria. She was also a Fallen Walls Lab Ibadan 2020 participant and a member of the Lagos Studies Association. Today, she will discuss a paper titled "A Mother Like No Other, The Politics of Child Rearing in Colonial Nigeria." And I'll turn it over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much. Apologies for coming a bit late to the discussion. I had a little issue with my network. So I'll be discussing on Mother Like No Other, Politics of Rearing a Child in Colonial Nigeria. I hope, okay. So I'll be discussing on A Mother Like No Other, the politics of rearing a child in colonial Nigeria. Permission to take 2 verses from this poet on poet's rendition on motherhood. When from mutual awakening I come, when after maturity I choose, when wishes, hopes, and all long for me, what a sweet yet very bitter lot of woman. Now I hand to begin afresh, the motherly care to fend the young, till time present me a bit of rest to enjoy the fruits and honor of motherhood. Motherhood is commonly practiced among women as a domestic responsibility, which places children only in the care of mothers. And these practices are found and peculiar to, every culture around the world. And in pre-colonial Nigerian society, rearing a child is a collective effort. Oyewunke Oyewumi contends that historically, motherhood is the most significant category in the social, political, and spiritual organization of the Yoruba society. She also stressed on the importance of Iya, motherhood. The work of the mother is important in a child's growth. Her influence cannot be quantified because a child's production is defined by the mother. For instance, now, a child's sluggishness, a child's fashion sense, the smartness of a child is attributed to the mother's choice of food or the influence in rearing a child. So the study of infant and maternal health care within the framework of motherhood as a lifestyle in colonial Nigeria is informed by the current health difficulties faced by mothers and infants in post-colonial Nigeria. So this study is adopted an historical approach and also utilizes an interpretative design. And moving on, politics of rearing a child in colonial Nigeria. According to Lynn Abrams, domesticity and motherhood were considered by the British society at large to be a sufficient fulfillment for females. Due to the Imperial Public Health Initiative of the interwar period, the exposure, the knowledge, and the experience of mothers was influenced, and this brought about the changing definition of motherhood in colonial Nigeria. In Nigeria, from the early 1920s, there were alarming high rates of infant mortality that was recorded in Lagos, for instance. Like Lagos was majorly Lagos has bulk of research and analysis based on the mortality rate and maternal death. So this result prompted measures to be taken in colonial Nigeria to reduce mortality rate and also to improve the health of mothers and children from 1925 until 1945. By the end of World War II, services for maternal and infant welfare were well established in the colony, starting with the first Health Week and a baby competition, which was organized by the Lagos Town Council. The colonial health development education on the need of proper nutrition and the acceptance of British ideas of rearing a child resulted in a neglect of pre-colonial Nigerian child-rearing customs. However, prominent Nigerians were also not in support of these British standards. For instance, Abat Macaulay was against the notion, was against the British standards of preparing a child, like prepare a child for the next age while Olufumi Ransome-Kuti challenged the British notion of motherhood. Moving on, I'll be looking at motherhood as a lifestyle in colonial Nigeria. This pictorial representation of second annual Otta Baby Show competition. In the previous slide, I stressed on the fact that due to the high mortality death rate in colonial Nigeria, initiatives were introduced by the colonial government. So advertisements of British baby products, baby show competitions portrayed the importance of a mother, and these initiatives enhanced mothers' lifestyle across colonial Nigeria. Health weeks and baby shows became regular events in urban centers across the nation, and children from birth, like from 0 to around 5-year-old, were also featured. Like they have stages of these baby show competitions, and all mothers that attended government prenatal clinics were with their babies were the only set of mothers that were eligible to enter the contest to determine the earliest child. So this shows provided insight into the campaign for the modernization of African motherhood. The second slide is a pictorial representation of the advertisement of British baby products in colonial Nigeria. And these advertisements emphasize on how wise mothers who rely on the usage of British products help to enhance their child's growth. And you can see from the representation of words in this advertisement, it says wise mothers rely on lactogen infant food. So this is also another representation of the lifestyle that was inherent in colonial Nigeria. So motherhood was of great priority to the colonial master, and it can be deduced that the British colonial policies and healthcare services in colonial Nigeria considered children as the future of the nation, because the British government invested heavily in bringing mothers together, even through this competition, organizing it across the country, even bringing different initiatives in the northern part of Nigeria, in the western part, and in the eastern part. At first, in the northern part of Nigeria, this set of people didn't fully accept the introduction of this bottle feeding method or breast milk. They didn't accept it at first, but with time they became used to that method of rearing a child. So while I think at a particular stage, at the clinics in the north, these women didn't come to the clinic. They had to go to their house, like to attend to them because of their APUDA system. So moving on, it can be deduced that the British colonial policies and healthcare services in colonial Nigeria consider children as the future of the nation, and this initiative educated mothers on their duty to their child's health, to the child's proper socialization. That even in the clinics, they emphasize on the fact that mothers should give their children breast milk at the right time. They also taught mothers on how to properly feed a baby through the bottle feeding method. And now child's proper socialization through these baby show competitions, whereby mothers come together, dress and having their babies come together to participate in these competitions. And we have, at the end of the competition, we have a winner who the picture of the baby taken posted or probably advertised in the newspapers of that time, in a view to enable the child to become good citizens. And as a result, colonial Nigerian childbearing practices were politicized to conform to the British standards. And we know the British standards include the Victorian ideals of childbearing. That's also another particular topic that because of the time, I might not really be able to talk much about that. So conclusion, the politics of rearing a child in colonial Nigeria was tilted towards the adoption of Victorian ideals of motherhood and neglect in indigenous child-rearing practices. After Nigeria gained independence, this change had an impact on mothers' lifestyle and social situation, and mother perspective rearing child be dominant in post-colonial Nigeria. For instance, we have the local method of spoon feeding a child herbal mixture. We hardly see something like that today. Even if it's in the society today, we hardly see people go with baby herbal concussions. So thank you so much for listening, and appreciate it.
Yeah, Oliver Tosin, thank you for keeping to time. I was about ask you to round up, but good thing you stop when you did. Next person on queue, it's Temitope Olaniyi. Temitope Olaniyi holds the Masters in Public Health, specializing in child and maternal health. She's currently focused on public health. Sorry, can you hear me? Okay, good. Sorry, trying to. She's currently focused on public health research and programming on women and children. She is going to be presenting a paper on In Search of Cure, Motherhood and Children Alternative Medicine. So Temitope, over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Temitope Olaniyi, like she has rightly said, and I will be presenting on In Search of Cure, So, please, I would like to share my screen. Okay, so this project I'll be preparing, I'll be presenting on
Sorry,
is on complementary and
I-
alternative medicine.
you're having
And,
two gadgets on, and it's giving
and it
an
was
echo.
research that was done in Nigeria among mothers of under 5. So get to know what exactly it is.
Excuse me, Temitope, do you have any other device signed on? So there's an echo. As we can hardly hear you because there's an echo.
Hello?
Yes, we can, that's better.
So is it better now?
Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. So I will be talking about In Search of Cure, a case study of complementary and alternative medicine used among mothers of under 5 in Ile-Ife. So every day, mothers of children seek for care for their children when they are ill. They go to hospitals. A lot of people use different types of options to get cure for their children when they are sick. In Nigeria, as it's obtained in other developing countries, channels of healthcare utilization vary, and they include traditional healers, spiritual churches, pharmacies, and then some people go to health centers and hospitals. Osama 2011 said that caregiving behavior in Southwest Nigeria has reported the use of a combination of both healthcare facilities and also complementary and alternative medicine. Now, by complementary and alternative medicine, it is defined as a sum total of knowledge, skills, and practices based on theories, beliefs, and experiences indigenous to different cultures. So this is like any treatment that is out of the conventional, that is out of, okay, going to the hospital, getting drugs that are registered with maybe NAFDAC and all of these other drug agencies. So when mothers go through that route of maybe getting treatment from traditionalists, that is referred to as being use of CAM, complementary and alternative medicines. So I had to go into it, like, to know, okay, how do they go about this? What is the prevalence of the use of CAM in the treatment of under 5? As we know that under 5, it's actually a very sensitive age in the growth of children. And at this particular time, they are prone to a lot of illnesses, let's say common cold, fever, and all of that. So the methodology, it was a cross-sectional study that was carried out in Ile-Ife, Ife local government to be precise. And then the mothers who are residents in the local government area at that particular time and who had children aged 5 and below. A semi-structured questionnaire was used to get information from them, and where we asked about their use, if they themselves have been using this complementary and alternative medicine, if they have ever used it, if they are still using it, and if they are using it for their children. And the data that was collected was analyzed using SPSS version 16, after which I was able to get some things from it. So from the data that I was able to collect, I saw that the average age of the mothers, although it was between 18 to 72, but the majority of them were between the childbearing age of 18 to 35 years. And the summary of the results was that majority of the respondents reported ever using CAM for themselves. That is like 84% of them said they have used one form of CAM or the other. And then about 86% said they have used it for their children in time past. So I also noticed that a lot of these mothers who are using complementary and alternative medicine for themselves tend to use for their children also, because they have a higher percentage. Like the mothers that are using it, when you ask them, do you use for your children? Yet they say yes. And then half of these respondents use it for prevention of illnesses, while more people use it when they are treating a particular illnesses. Although these have a lot of other patterns. For some people, they would have started using conventional medicine. Maybe they have gone to the hospital, they have bought drugs from the pharmacy, but then at the point they feel, okay, the drug is being slow, and somebody advised them on, okay, maybe you should try this out. And then they start using the complementary and alternative medicine by the side. Some other people stop the conventional medicine they are using outrightly to continue with the complementary and alternative medicine. So reported source of advice before the use of CAM by mothers, I asked them, who do they consult before using this CAM? And then a lot of them were saying, okay, I talked with my husband, my mother-in-law was one that recommended it, my mom, and then there were a lot of other people that said, okay, it was my neighbor that gave this suggestion. So it was like, okay, really, Nigeria, because of this close-knit relationship that we have, a lot of mothers have to be like, receive advice from people around them, people close to them, their family members, and then friends and neighbors. So the most common reason for the use of CAM includes its effectiveness, then the cultural acceptability, accessibility, and availability. For some of them, they said, okay, this was what my parents used for me while I was growing up. So definitely it's not going to do my child any harm using it for my child also. For some other people, they feel, okay, that one works faster than the conventional medicine. Rather than me using drugs for 12 days, they believe that once they take a shot of a particular agbo, the illness has stopped. So, okay, I have said this already. This is a chart reflecting the use of CAM ever for the mother, the current use, and then the use for the children. You can see that 83.5% of the mothers have ever used CAM, whereby 86.9% of these mothers that have ever used CAM have ever used for their children also. And 73% is using CAM for their children presently. So for some, they use it for treatment of childhood illnesses. For some other people, they just use it for prevention, like, okay, so that the child will be healthy. So they believe that every morning they should give the child a particular liquid, which is gotten from some leaves, so that the child will be healthy. So this is a chart reflecting the people that are consulted by the mother before the use of CAM. We have husband, we have parents, in-laws, we have neighbors and friends, we have physicians, and then we have others. So we can see from here that a lot of these mothers don't even share these ask questions from their physicians. And even when they start using CAM, they don't inform their physicians that, oh, when they go to hospital and then they ask for the history of what they've used in the past, they don't mention the use of CAM. They about the medicine, that is all. Maybe because they believe the medical practitioners will scold them and they don't believe in it and all of that. So when they were asked to describe the pattern of use of CAM in combination with other forms of treatment, 32.5% of them said they use both CAM and conventional medicine together, while about 25% reported that they stopped conventional medicine midway and then commenced CAM. Majority said that their under 5 children consume CAM products orally, and 26.1% said they usually rub their under 5 children with CAM products in forms of oshedudu and some leaves that they rub on the body of the children. So this is another chart reflecting the use of CAM. How do they use it? Is it with conventional medicine? Is it alone? Then the description of use, do they use it together? So we can see here that a large percentage of them use it alone after they have probably stopped using conventional medicine. So the types of CAM used for treatment and prevention of illnesses. So I grouped these according to herbs. There are some that are natural products, the use of leaves, especially different kinds of leaves. They talk about different types of leaves, and they were even showing me the examples of these leaves, and then they will say, okay, once you use this to rub your forehead, if you're having any headache, the headache will stop immediately. So some use herbs. Some other people use vitamin supplements that are gotten from animal products and then mixture of animal and plant products. And then we have branded herbal products too, then black soap. And then it also covers spiritual methods, the use of anointing oil and some other spiritual gimmicks that some people believe in to use so that a child will be healthy. So mothers' perception of CAM use as being beneficial or harmful to under 5 children. A lot of these mothers, 98% of them believe that CAM use is actually very beneficial for their children. They said that is what makes their children healthy, that it even prevents them from being harmed by the evil ones. Well, when we asked them, okay, is there any harm? Do you think that there is any side effects of these things that you use? It was just about 7% of them that said it's yes, it could be harmful, but then they still prefer to use it than conventional medicine, because even the conventional medicine too can be harmful also. So the perceived benefits of CAM use on under 5 children. The mother said it helps prevent illnesses, it heals wounds, alleviates pains, and then it cures diseases. So they even got to, somebody told me then that, okay, when they use, when a bee stings a child, that child is immune for life. That they really do not, the child will not need to go to the hospital because the sting of the bee has immune the child against any form of illnesses. So they believe in all of these things and then they keep on using it. In conclusion, the prevalence of the use of CAM for treatment of acute illnesses in the study area was found to be very high, that is 86%. The use of CAM was found to be significantly associated with the health-seeking behavior of the mothers. Mothers who use CAM are much more likely to use it for their children also. Also, conventional alternative medicine was perceived to be efficient, effective, safe, and culturally acceptable by the respondents. This contributed to the use of CAM by these mothers. And their mothers reported that the information as regards where to purchase these CAMs are always gotten from families, friends, and neighbors. Few mothers reported experiencing side effects from the use of CAM. The side effects they reported include rashes, diarrhea, stomach upset, and body discomfort. In conclusion, majority of the CAM users were satisfied with the effectiveness of CAM and will recommend it to other people. So my recommendation from this research that I have done will be that because mothers perceive CAM as being safe and more effective, researchers should need to focus on evidence-based research on the safety and effectiveness of CAM, and then more attention should be given to evidence-based research on the types of CAM which may be beneficial to the population. Also, regulatory bodies such as NAFDAC should ensure that there is proper documentation of appropriate CAM products with public sensitization on how to identify them. The major challenge with all these CAM products is because they don't have dosage. Some people just tend to overuse them because there is no particular measurement on, okay, this is the quantity that should be used. So if there is a regulatory body that is working on getting this regulated, it will be better for mothers who want to use that option. Mothers should be educated on the possible dangers of using health products that have not been proven safe and effective to replace, support, or delay conventional care, and use of products above recommended dose, like I said earlier. And then the Federal Ministry of Health should engage in awareness campaigns that will educate the public on the possible side effects of combining complementary and alternative medicine with modern medicine using different types of CAM concurrently. Some people, so that these drugs will work effectively and quick, they tend to mix a whole lot together and then use all of it together. So they should be educated on the combination of these drugs, getting to use them together, the dangers that could be there. Also, policymakers should put in place necessary laws, and existing laws should be strengthened to checkmate the quack and charlatans. Those people who are not registered should be checkmated by having a particular registration body which will have all of the accepted and registered traditional medicine people. And then proper recognition should be given to camp practitioners under the health policy of the country, and their practice should be regulated by a professional body, which will ensure that camp practitioners practice according to the laws binding it. Thank you.
Thank you for that presentation. That was perfect timing. Our final presenter is our co-chair and co-organizer, Folara Miflorish Olorunibe. She is a doctoral student at the Department of History, Rhodes University, South Africa, working on the social history of midwifery practices in colonial Ibadan between the 1890s and 1960. Her research explores medical pluralism and epistemic contestations between missionary doctors and traditional birth attendants in the colonial maternal health services. She is a winner of the African Multiple Cluster of Excellence Scholarship for completion of her doctoral research at the Rhodes University African Studies Center. She received a Master of Arts degree in History from the University of Ibadan and a bachelor's degree in history and international studies from Adekunle Ajasin University. She's also a junior research fellow of IFRA Nigeria and a member of Lagos Studies Association. And for our final presentation, she will be discussing marginalized wellness, exclusionary healthcare, and midwifery in rural Ibadan, 1900 to 1950.
Okay, thanks for the introduction. I would want to kind of apologize to this panel that I won't be sharing a screen, because I am currently using my phone to join this panel. The network reception presently where I am is not that good. But what I will quickly do is to give a summary of what I have here, and just make sure we keep to time and get over with this panel. So I will be going straight to what I have here. I have marginalized wellness, exclusionary maternal health care and midwifery services in rural Ibadan, 1940 to 1950. Yeah, I have done. I have given a subsession to give a better understanding of what I mean by marginalized wellness, where I'll be talking about the dilemma of maternal health in rural Ibadan, maternal health care services outside the administrative area in Ibadan, and lastly, I will be deconstructing the colonial policies on maternal health in rural Ibadan. So as a form of introduction, I want to say the history of maternal health care marginalization in rural Ibadan can be traced back to the 1920s, when the British imperial government and other colonizing bodies, in particular the missionaries, initiated Western biomedicine, which include and led to the spread and development of Western obstetrics in Ibadan. This was possible through the establishment of medical facilities, training of human resources for health service delivery, and the implementation of maternal and infant welfare policies. Reference to maternal health in the rural areas of colonial Ibadan includes parts of the areas in Ibadan known as Fiditi, Iseyin, Okeoyo, Otu, Agoare, Kishi, and Igono. In these mentioned areas, some characteristics stood out. Firstly was the apparent administrative absence of the colonial government and the voluntary agencies in respect to the provision of socio-economic services, including healthcare services. Secondly, while those in urban Ibadan enjoyed access to moderately well-equipped and well-staffed maternity clinics, hospitals, and dispensaries, the rural population was still faced with outrageous neglect in the provisions of maternal health care services and in the establishment of healthcare facilities. More so, even though health service had been extended to the native population, the quality of service was below standard. This is because healthcare service among Africans were serviced by a few doctors and were poorly funded. In the rural Ibadan, it is worse, and much of the job was done by the medical missions that were insufficiently funded by the colonial government to engage in both the health of Africans in the urban and rural areas. Thirdly, is the long distance Africans in the rural areas of Ibadan had to cover to patronize health facilities in the urban township. These characteristics did not only have severe financial implications on the people in rural areas, but also of consequences. Of midwifery service. Speaking of maternal era Ibadan, nominally the colonial maternal health care and midwifery service policies areas of Ibadan. Our colonial government focused the implementation of its maternal health care policies and welfare schemes in the urban areas of Ibadan and ignored the locals in the rural areas. Hence, Western maternal health care and midwifery services was disproportionately distributed between the urban and the rural areas. You see, this resulted in the rural areas having the highest risk of maternal and infant mortalities during the colonial period. I would have shared a statistical data showing the increase of maternal health casualties during this period in rural Ibadan. But unfortunately, I am using my phone to join this panel. Now, the question we want to ask ourselves is, what is maternal health care provision? Why is maternal health care provision, aside the administrative area, not important? Like I have earlier mentioned, the rationale for the colonial state intervention on maternal health care stems from the need to modernize, in quotes, traditional midwifery practices with a view to increasing manpower, efficiency, and productivity for the colonial economy. Furthermore, and ideologically, Western biomedical developments in the 20th century inspired the colonial states to transform the African traditional form of birthing, which was believed, in quotes, to be injurious to the health of the mother and child, and the major cause of maternal and infant mortality. Hence, the need to transform the African traditional medical practice to one that would guarantee the health safety of both mother and child. The underlying philosophy is that African traditional birthing practice are not modern, in quotes, and cannot guarantee the safety of both mother and child. Therefore, since the African traditional birthing practices cannot be used in the British African colonies like Ibadan, thus presenting Western obstetrics to the locals became the sole responsibility of the colonial states as the major actor pushing for this change. Primarily in the introduction and development of maternal health care and midwifery service, the colonial government, apart from making provisions of these services in the urban areas, did not see the usefulness of providing similar healthcare services in the rural areas of Ibadan. Not until around the 1950s. This is attributable to, one, the overwhelming importance placed on healthcare in the urban setting, based on the belief that a healthy African population in the urban areas will reduce the spread of diseases and cause economic progress. Two, the challenge of financing any major project in the colonies by the colonial government and medical missions due to the aftermath of the Great Depression. And three, lack of professional medical officers. And four, the distinguishing features of indirect rural colonialism, which is partial reliance on native institutions in Africa, which was ill-equipped because of the form of education and temperament given to cope with the changing colonial environment. You know, all this affected and caused low and unequal levels of socioeconomic and political development in Africa. Thus, the administration of the rural areas from the Ibadan Center appeared not to be without some difficulties. It was because of this period, in the 1950s, the British colonial government left the bulk of the healthcare of the colonial subjects in Ibadan to the missionaries who pioneered Western midwifery in the 1920s. The colonial state has invariably blamed its inability to provide maternal healthcare services and the underdevelopment of maternal healthcare in rural areas of Ibadan on the shortage of professional medical officers, financial stringencies, and administrative inadequacies. The identification of these problems has been accepted by the colonial government as the most rational and realistic explanation for the exclusionary maternal healthcare policies in Ibadan and the marginalization of rural Ibadan. There's no denying the fact that these reasons are important factors to be considered, especially in explaining and propagating colonial policies vis-a-vis the underdevelopment of maternal health care in rural Ibadan or its disparities with urban areas of Ibadan. However, it is important to state here that the overzealousness and the propaganda of the colonial states to abolish the African traditional medical practices in the 1920s in Ibadan almost made the practice extinct in the rural areas and at the mercy of Western maternal policies that hardly included the rural areas in its implementation plans, as well as portraying the colonial government to be in complete control of the maternal and infant mortality crisis in the rural areas of in Ibadan generally. Unfortunately, and with the turn of events, this proved not to be the case, as the colonial government was only able to execute its maternal health care policies in the urban centers. Consequently, the rural folk became automatically marginalized and excluded from colonial maternal health policies. But rather than become plain victims of the colonial state, the rural communities expressed their displeasure through the subtle presence of social struggles. As there are pictures to show different protests at different times of Ibadan women to the marginalization of them without providing adequate maternal health facilities for them. The last session is deconstructing the colonial policies on maternal health in rural Ibadan. You see, archival documents on the introduction of rural healthcare provides a glimpse into the politics of Western medicine and maternal healthcare in the rural areas of Ibadan. They also highlight the debates over the credibility of the colonial government in promoting modern, in quotes, modern maternal health care practices. In the late 1940s and early 1950s, the colonial government proposed to establish rural health centers. This is in response to the protest of the rural women in colonial Ibadan. This was, however, in paper, because it was in order to consolidate the work of the medical missions to respond to the pressure from the rural women seeking better health care, and also to reduce the alarming rates of diseases due to the mass treatment of patients of women in the urban centers, and generally to assist in the preventive medicine ideology amongst the rural population. The government proposed to set up a total of 21 centers, health centers for maternal health. In this proposed rural health centers, it is expected that the staff would undertake the direction of a circle of improved native authorities dispensary that were already in place and the supervision of practicing midwives, maternity homes, home visiting and nursing, and development of health consciousness through education and propaganda. The colonial government set out objectives for the establishment of one or more first-class hospitals in each province of Nigeria as at the time. These hospitals were expected to serve the African population in the towns in which they are situated and take in more serious and obscure cases for smaller rural hospitals in outlying areas. The latter, in turn, withdraw their patients from circuits of villages, dispensaries supervised by medical officers in charge of the sub areas. The target for this plan was that healthcare would have gotten to the rural population by the end of the 10-year development plan. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Expenditure for the plan is expected to cover not only general hospital works, but maternity hospitals and maternity services. The government's rural health care plan for the rural communities were well received by the people. You know, it was a promising gesture from the colonial government, especially concerning rural maternal health care. Apparently and disappointingly, the rural health care and the 10-year development plan scheme for the rural communities were just a cosmetic move by the colonial government towards addressing the issues of rural health care. As time went by and the wait continued with no visible rural maternity projects in sight, there were certain amounts of criticism in the local press. We got to see people coming to the news outlets to express their displeasure about what the colonial government promised and was unable to fulfill. The editor of, for instance, the Sunday Times, speaking on behalf of the rural communities, decried the inadequate maternal services in the rural areas. He believed the colonial government only gave lip service to the plight of the people and has failed to heed the advice to build more clinics and maternity homes since the 1950s. He accused the government of doing absolutely nothing, hence the congestion at the hospitals in the urban centers. The editor stated that the solution to the present congestion at the urban maternity centers, as the people could not wait for the completion of the promised, in quotes, new buildings, which are only being proposed, is to hire well-furnished buildings for temporary use till the new buildings are completed. It also suggested that the sum of £10 be paid to patients for antenatal treatment. And you see, the solution, according to the critics in the newspapers, continued. You know, they suggested to help to increase the revenue of the government by, you know, paying some form of hospital charges just to be able to fund medical staffs and to complete probably an ongoing project in the rural areas. For complicated case, however, patients can be suggested that they be rushed to the urban centers. You know, the critics in the local newspapers reviewed the policies of the colonial government, who had flagged rural health care and medical development plans respectively to alleviate the maternal health care crisis in the margins. According to archival documents, the colonial government was responsible for deciding maternity hospitals to be built and how it should be run. These documents have highlighted the relationship between the colonial government and the missionaries who helped provide healthcare services in the margins during this period. They have also established the involvement of the government in the spread of Western midwifery practices in urban Ibadan. However, the politics of rural maternal health care, a significant aspect of the government's rural health scheme in the 1950s, reveals the true intent of the colonial government in the margins. In conclusion, just to quickly summarize all I have said so far, the increased rural maternal health crisis, which was sparked off by the neglect and marginalization of the combined forces of the missionaries and the colonial government in the margins of Ibadan, of rural Ibadan, remained unabated even up to the 1950s. It is quite disheartening that the colonial government, even while it proposed and established rural health centers by the 1950s, they were in precarious conditions. These established rural health centers were rehabilitated and does not have the necessary equipment and health personnel to make the center a standard one. I'll stop here and take whatever comes up in the question and answer session. Thank you.
All right, thank you to all of the presenters for wonderful presentations. I have noted some questions for a number of the presenters, but I'll open this up to the audience. There is a Q&A tab. You can put your questions on the Q&A tab, and if you can unmute yourself, I don't know that the audience can, then you can also ask your questions directly, but otherwise we will be monitoring the Q&A for questions. And we already have a question in the Q&A tab for Oluwatosin. This is from Damilola, and Damilola says, "Thank you for your presentation. It was quite eye-opening. Can you talk more about baby show as it relates to the politics of child rearing in colonial Nigeria?" And that's for Oluwatosin. You're muted.
All right, thank you so much. I just unmuted myself. Okay, so based on your question, baby show as a means of politicizing child rearing practices in colonial Nigeria. Baby show, because my research, I mainly used the print media for my research, and based on what the data I received and what I studied, I used a number of newspapers to understand how the baby show competition was represented, from the Chronicles, from the Daily Times, Daily Service, and West African Pilots, and I can deduce that the baby show was a form of like a mechanism for social regulation, and it means that, okay, now after these women have been to these healthcare centers, after they've been educated that, okay, they have to feed their baby through this method, they have to do that. So the baby show was just to encourage them, to welcome them into that British system of rearing a child. You understand? And in this competition, there are ways in which a baby dress. They check, there are some things they check in the baby. They check if the teeth is white. They check the cheek of the baby. They check how, active the baby is. You understand? So I think it's more like a kind of a welcome to the fact that, oh, you're welcome to this social social gathering of British what's it called? Of British I don't know how to put it, but I think that's just what I understand from that from my research. Like, it's just like a kind of welcome, like, oh, you're welcome to this social gathering of British style or system of raising a child or rearing a child. So it's just like a complimentary, like, okay, just a complimentary to these mothers. And at the end of the day, across Nigeria, colonial Nigeria, so that time, we have baby show was conducted in Warri. The one was conducted in Ogun State, that's Ota, in Lagos. So it was all over, whereby dignitaries were welcome to this gathering, and many women look forward to participating in these baby shows. And at the end of the day, the British were able to achieve something, because at the end of the day, mothers the intern, like, they brought their babies to this clinic, because on the norms, when they were they introduced this healthcare centers, healthcare clinics, the number of people that go to these healthcare clinics were not much. But after they saw that, oh, okay, they're doing a kind of for competition, babies are being awarded, they are giving recognition to the mother, and oh, they have this new style standard, they want to participate. So you see many mothers going, registering their babies in these healthcare centers. And before you know it, it became an acceptable norm in the society. So I hope I've been able to answer your question, and if not, I would also put more light in that. Thank you.
Yes, I think that addresses that question really well. We have another question on the Q&A for Flourish. This is from Chukudike Opaleke, and the question is this: during the many protests from rural women in colonial Ibadan, what was the position of the traditional rulers and chiefs, as well as men? What role did the men play? Was the whole protest conducted just by women and mothers? Should we assume that the whole protest was a genderized form of protest from women of rural Ibadan? And that's a loaded question. It's a very good one too.
Really okay. I will quickly address. I think I will have to probably take it one after the other. But it's actually a very nice question. And I would want to say there's actually a follow-up paper to this particular paper I just presented. Because, when I was talking about critics of the colonial government policies, I kind of omitted that there was also a body that was actually formed by the indigenous people. There was an incident where about 500 women. I can't be certain of if men were part of that process, but there were a group of women who actually went to the Olubadan in council and chief in council as at that period, to allay their grievances of what they were facing, especially as maternal health is concerned. So why they went to do that? Because of this issues, and because at some point they decided, okay, we won't be going to the colonial hospitals again. I think we should rely on our traditional medicine, because if the colonial government is telling us our practices are not okay, and they are kind of trying to sell an idea to us, and they are not making provisions for these ideas to actually float, it simply means they have ulterior motives. So the IPDC was formulated in 1945, if I can remember correctly, to address these issues. This IPDC includes members of the Olubadan Council, the chiefs. They were nominated to address the issues of maternal health. They kind of serve as an intermediary between the people and the colonial government. It's actually a whole a discussion, but this was a kind of a solution to the issues of maternal health crisis in the rural areas. Not only in the rural areas, it's the body that was constituted, the IPDC, that is the Ibadan Division, Divisional Provisional Council, if I can remember correctly, was instituted, and they served both people, the locals in the rural areas and in the urban centers. I hope I have been able to answer that question.
Okay, if there's any part of the question that's left out, Chukudike, feel free to follow up. And there's a question from the audience. Ayodeji Adewite, feel free to ask your question. Ayodeji, are you there? All right, while we wait for that question, there's a follow-up question from Damilola Damilola, this question is for Temitope. Damilola says, I'm just curious about your study area. Why Ife East? What is so fascinating about this area?
Okay, thank you so much for the question, Damilola. I chose Ife East because the area is not much, although it's a dense populated area, but then the population there are not as much literate like that of Ife Central. So with that, I felt looking at it that, okay, there are a lot of mothers around that side who are exposed to these things. They are exposed, but then in another way, they are still holding on to culture. So that was what informed the study area, which is Ife East local government. We have Ife East local government, we have Ife Central and some other parts. Although Ife East and Ife Central local government forms the base, the center part of Ile-Ife town itself.
Okay, I don't see any other questions. So while we wait for other questions from the audience, I'll go ahead and ask mine. I have a kind of a joint question for Flourish and Oluwatosin. So Flourish, you mentioned that marginalization of rural Ibadan when it comes to maternal welfare can be traced back to the 1920s. So why 1920s? Have you looked at, so basically what was going on before this period? Why do we trace the marginalization to the 1920s and not maybe to 1910 or another time period before that? And Oluwatosin, you mentioned that infant mortality rate was high from the 1920s as well. So my question then is, what was the infant mortality rate like before the 1920s? What is it that was going on in the 1920s? Why do you pinpoint this period? And then I welcome the both of you to kind of reflect on your choice of 1920. Was there, is there a particular trend that seemed to be drawing us to the 1920s? Is it something about the sources that we are seeing in the archives that's kind of drawing us to the 1920s? And this is something that, I don't know if this is an article, a book manuscript, whatever. This is also something that you can reflect on in the actual manuscript. So I just wanted your thoughts about that. Why 1920s? Because 1920s seem to be an important time frame for the two of you.
Okay. Miss Flourish, are you going first or should I?
Oliver, so you can go ahead and start. I'll come along.
All right. Okay. So my research was on the print media and the representation of motherhood in colonial Nigeria, and my research period was between 1930 to 1960, because I majorly used the print media to analyze the representation of motherhood in colonial Nigeria. And this period was central because it was at that period we had the first female newspaper editor in person of Ronke Ajayi. So that was why I chose that period, 1930. And also I referred back to 1925 because of the materials that were available. That's the annual medical report that I got, because I got from the 1920, 25, 35 to down to 45. So, and also another thing was because during that period, that was the period of interwar year period, whereby after the World War I, there were a lot of activities, the British activities in its colonial territories, and it was majorly focused on medical activities, aside the whole yellow fever pandemic, the outbreak of syphilis. So I think the major reason why I also use that 1920s is because because of the materials that I had available, and also the fact that it was within my scope. Like, 1930, I could also look back, doing my background of the study, because I think I looked at my study from the pre-colonial period, looking at the representation of motherhood in pre-colonial Nigeria down to the colonial period, and so that was why I had to make mention of that.
Okay, I will quickly address the question because it's already almost 4:30. This is actually a part of my doctoral thesis, and I actually began the studies from 1893 in colonial Ibadan. And in colonial Ibadan, the 1920s was the year maternal health became a specialized healthcare service in colonial Ibadan. And that is why I started by saying the 1920s, because that is the period maternal health became a very sensitive issue for the missionaries and the colonial government, who were at the time needed manpower and human resources to establish the cocoa industry in colonial Ibadan. That's at that period. So this time frame is a very sensitive time period that I had to pick it from, instead of tracing it back to the 1893 when colonial medicine was generally introduced to colonial Ibadan. I think have I been able to answer your question?
Yes, that answers that question. We have a question, and this is probably our final question from Ayodeji Adewite. Ayodeji says, I was wondering if there are Africans, men or women, who worked within the colonial framework, and if there are Africans in these spaces, how would you describe the ways that they carried on their work? Does it help disturb the traditional / modern boundary? And I do love this question, because this is something that I've delved into in the past, and it is interesting. So I'm turning this over to, I'm not sure who the question is directed at, so anybody can jump in. Esther, I think this is well within your area as well as the rest of you.
Sure. Well, I think, okay, let's have the question.
Well, greetings, everyone. Right, so in my research about Lagos in particular, I had to also dig into the history of the introduction of the colonial birthing framework. And yes, there were Africans who were part of that. And just like we can see how complicated and complex the participation of Africans might be in colonial framework regarding any system, including the maternal health system itself, we would see that there were a lot of promise around the fact that the colonial framework would result in better maternal health care. It's going to reduce infant mortality. It's going to reduce maternal mortality. So all of those promises were really catchy, and Africans were willing to be part of that process, looking forward to having all of those, better maternal infant outcome. But as we've seen over the years, all of those promises haven't been delivered, right? And we still see a lot of participation, even because I described this process of this post-colonial one as even a neo-colonial, and what Sabelo Ndlovu-Gasheni will call coloniality is still ongoing, and which is why we would see Western medical practitioners who are Africans who are working in medical spaces still using the framework and still with the belief that it is better, it is more authoritative, and then whatever is indigenous is inferior So that participation was then and still is now. And we're still really struggling with all of that. But we have actually seen that all of those promises haven't been delivered, and also that one strict blanket, Western medical framework can be the only way to reduce maternal mortality, infant mortality, or promote maternity. It would have to be holistic. It would have to be bringing everything together. We would still have to really rely also on our indigenous birthing framework and see how the integration and collaboration can be two ways and wouldn't be a bottom up that tend to marginalize the indigenous birthing framework. So yes, there were a lot of participation, and it's still ongoing the way that I see it. And because so far, if there have been research with Western medical practitioners who still believe that indigenous birthing practitioners shouldn't be practicing because it has to all just be Western. So I would say, to answer that question, yes, there was and there still is, which is why now we have to look at how to decolonize this birthing space for us and to really see how that might actually deliver that promise of reducing maternal mortality and infant mortality as well. And I would just say this, just to round up that, the reason that we can see that it's really not working. So one, that's one reason. Second, there are a lot of restrictions. There are a lot of things that would need to be put in place for those promises to be delivered. I need to get some water, please. Sorry, I just had to drink water. So we see that the government will also need to do a lot in making sure that we have facilities, we have adequate personnel and all of that. But the belief is that when that happens, then the indigenous birthing framework would fade away. But if you're thinking globally as well, we would see that Black people in other spaces other than the African continent who have relatively better Western medical healthcare practitioners and all of that, we'll still see that there's still a high rate of infant and maternal mortality in a country like the US, for instance. And of course, other places, the UK, Canada, Brazil, and anywhere that you just have Black people, they are dying more, which is to say that there are a lot of ways that we need to open it up more and have a multi approach to maternal health for Black birthing persons and their children, wherever we find ourselves across borders. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, all right. We're out of time. It's now 4:34. Hopefully we don't get kicked out before we close. But thank you for the wonderful presentations, and thank you to the audience for joining us. There was a question from Tolu. I think Tosin put an answer in the chat, but we're out of time now. So I welcome everybody to join us tomorrow at 1 p.m. for the second part of this panel on the politics of motherhood, midwifery, and child rearing. Thank you all for wonderful presentations. Thank you for wonderful questions and answers. And I hope to see some of you tomorrow again. All right, bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.